Hello, I'm host of this. I bid you welcome. Please come in, have a seat, and I will tell you a few short tales. Tonight, many tales will be told, some true, some to amuse. Which is which, it is for you to decide.
Gobble-no. There was a hill that ate people. The rabbit's grandmother told him never to go near it. So the rabbit went to the hill and shouted, "Gobble-no, swallow me, come, devour me." But Gobble-no knew the rabbit and took no notice. Later that day, a group of travelers came by, looking for a place to shelter from the rain, and Gobble-no opened his green and ferny lips, and the travelers thought that they had found a cave. They went in, and the rabbit slipped close behind them. But the hill felt hairy pads on his tunnels, and before the rabbit could reach the middle, Gobble-no threw him out, and the grass shut. The rabbit went and hid behind a tree, and a few days later a hunting party arrived at the hill just before night, and Gobble-no opened again. This time the rabbit used magic art and took the shape of a man, except for his ears, which he tucked down his shirt, so that they would not brush against the roof and make Gobble-no sneeze. He went down long and horrid passages until he came to the hill's stomach, and there were the remains of all the victims, and some who were not yet dead. "Hey, hey, hey!" shouted the rabbit. "Why don't you eat? You leave the best. Here's a delicious heart. What's wrong with that?" Gobble-no set up a dismal howling, for it was his own heart that the rabbit had seen. And the rabbit knew this and took out a knife and stabbed the hill dead. The ground split, and the blue sky lit the deep hollows, and the living came out and wept before the rabbit, and wanted to give him power and riches. But all the rabbit would take was Gobble-no's fat, and he went home with it on his back, and he and his grandmother were fit to burst from it for many a day.
The Ballad of the Jabberwock. My grandmother tells me when the lights are low how the Jabberwock appeared in Squonkum long ago. First, a frightened farmer tearing into town told how his wife had seen something big and brown, horned like a billy goat and scaled like a dragon, perched cross-legged on their brand-new wagon. It leaped into the barn and hid in the hay. She screeched blue murder and fainted away. The timmerman saw it coming from Crosskeys. It crept from Corkray's wood and peered round the trees. Footprints were found in fields, clawed like a bird's. It clumped over Karsh's roof, gibbering words. Then folks began to see it, here and everywhere, clinging to the steeple, winging through the air, with vans of a mighty bat, or walking in a pasture, upright as any man, and cocky as a master. Squonkum locked all its doors, and bright lamps were lit in chilly front parlors where folks seldom sit, except for a funeral or the minister's call. But what lurks in darkness, they lighted up all. Some few were skeptical and would only smile, but the path to the barn that night seemed like a mile. Reverend Wolsey preached of sin, and most folks agreed that it was a warning they had better heed. They named it the Jabberwock, for want of another. But some shook their heads, it's the devil's own brother. Then people came to church who'd never been yet. Some patched up a quarrel, and some paid a debt. Cousin Flo and Cousin Kate forgot they didn't speak, and Old Man Jones stayed sober for one amazing week. Wives left off nagging, and husbands kissed their wives. The Claybrook brothers went to work, for once in their lives. No one watered any milk or cut the measures down, and Tilly got religion, and all her girls left town. Then one day the town awoke to find it had fled. No one saw it squatting on his barn or shed. No one saw those footprints huge upon his lawn. Suddenly, as it had come, the Jabberwock had gone. The church held a meeting, and great thanks were given that Satan had done his worst and left them scared but shriven. Satan had ramped about like a roaring lion, but Squonkum held firm, and now was a little Zion. They were the wonder town of the countryside. They had driven evil out, they let good abide, for almost a fortnight. Then someone stole a sack of flour out of Barker's store, and Tilly's girls came back.
The Tale of the White Dove. When the mistress of the big house lay dying, so the house slave said, she raised herself on her elbow and vowed that she would come back to her home. She would come back as a white dove to her husband and to the garden where they had been happy together. No white dove came to the garden for months nor for years. But on the day that the master carried a bride inside the pillared portal, the slaves heard a low grieving, and in the garden, hardly distinguishable against the white blossoms on the snowball bush, they saw the white dove. Every afternoon after that, at exactly the same time, the bird appeared, uttering heart-broken moans. The slaves were frightened. They said that their first mistress had kept her word. The whole community became excited. People began peering over the garden wall to see the dove. The bride became tearful, the master exasperated. Finally, one afternoon, gun in hand, the master strode from his house in a towering rage. As he approached the snowball bush, the dove rose in the air, fluttered toward him. He raised his rifle and fired. A woman's scream sounded over the garden, and the dove flew away, a sudden crimson staining the whiteness of its breast. That night, as he lay in his bed, the master died. No one has ever known the cause of his death. The master was buried near the snowball bush, and though the house has fallen into ruins and the garden is overgrown with weeds, the gravestone still stands. When I last visited in Alabama, neighbors told me that each spring, when the snowball bush blooms, they can hear a dove moaning in the night. Then they remember this story. One of them says that he rode by the old house one moonlight night and saw on the topmost branch of the bush a white dove. Its breast, he swears, was stained blood red. The Phantom Merry-Go-Round. Among the pirate islands at the outer edge of Barataria Bay, the westernmost is Ile Dernière, now generally known as Last Island. For a little while it was the capital of the illegitimate empire of Jean Lafitte, the famous buccaneer who later moved to Grande Terre and became a picturesque hero at the Battle of New Orleans. Not long after the pirates had scattered, Last Island became a summer resort. Some of the most distinguished of New Orleans Creole families built luxurious cottages there. An enterprising merchant erected an elaborate hotel called the Trade Wind, which was decorated by many towers and bordered by pillared galleries. A whole wing of this long and spacious building was devoted to a ballroom, where an orchestra played nightly, and all the families from the cottages joined the hotel guests to dance the hours of darkness away. The season was at its height at the beginning of August in 1856. The summer residents congratulated each other that their island was cool, while the heat of New Orleans was almost intolerable. A strong north wind was blowing, and high waves raced in from the Gulf of Mexico to break in thundering surf upon the sand. Each day was bright and clear. On the 9th of the month came the first ominous evidences of possible disaster. Great dark clouds towered on the horizon, and the wind brought with it a roaring sound. Darkness came early that afternoon, and the sound increased. The islanders gathered at the ballroom, glad to divert themselves by dancing and forgetting the fears that stirred in their minds. Nervously, the ladies, in their formal gowns, looked out of the windows at the advancing waves, but soon the music and the gay rhythms of the dance captured their complete attention. When the gaiety was at its height, came a piercing scream. A girl had seen water spurt under the door of the ballroom and darken the shining floor. As some of the gentlemen raced toward the door, it burst from its hinges, and a resistless wave swept through the room. The struggling dancers heard a terrific crash, and the roof of the ballroom had blown away. Wave after wave followed, and the helpless humans, screaming and panic-stricken, were scattered by the seething waters. Those who fought their way out of the hotel saw whole cottages swept away from their foundations and bobbing crazily about. A small steamboat, the Star, had been snatched from her moorings and was blown up upon the island. It filled with water and sank on the site of a billiard parlor which had disappeared. A few of the victims of the storm fought their way to her hull and clung there throughout the night. Not far from the hotel stood a children's whirligig or merry-go-round. A group of men and women had fought their way to it, and they clung to the wooden rail above their heads. The wind increased its force and set the rail to circling. The terrified passengers kept desperate hold, their bodies hanging grotesquely as the rail went round. When the waters receded next morning, about 2/3 of the people on the island had lost their lives. Many were never found. But here and there on the wet sands lay corpses in odd, stiff attitudes. Almost a century has passed since this great tragedy, but the fishermen of Barataria Bay say that even today, when chugging past Last Island in their little boats, sometimes on blowy nights, they see on its shores a vast hotel, its windows gleaming with light, and they hear dance music above the whistle of the wind. Sometimes, too, a boat crew reports that they have beheld by the light of the windows dark shadows moving slowly in circular parade, like human bodies riding a gruesome merry-go-round.